eat and were filled. In my new book, I watch the word filled all the time. It's an extremely important word. And I show you how the word floats from tradition to tradition. There are key words that float. And they took up, you know, I look at my new book and look under filled to see what I mean. And they took up broken pieces, 12 basketfuls, and also fishes, and they ate. The loaves were for 5,000 men. 5,000 is usually the number Josephus gives for Essenes. 5,000 or 4,000 or 5,000. Other versions of this, it's 4,000 people that he's feeding. This is repeated again. This feeding episode, and then it's 4,000. I think it's repeated in chapter 16 of Matthew, and probably chapter 7 of Mark. Let's see, what did I want to... Oh, and so there are also, if you know the pseudo-Clementine recognitions, how many people went down to Jericho when James fled the angry enemy, Paul-type person who threw him down the steps of the temple in the middle of the debates in the early 40s? How many people fled down to Jericho and went out to see the two graves that whiten themselves every year in Book 1 of the recognitions? Do any of you remember? 5,000. Always 5,000. In Acts, how many were added to the early church, etc., in the early chapters? 5,000. Well, this is, I think, the number of Essenes. This is the number Josephus normally gives for Essenes, 4,000 or 5,000. Anyway, you know, be that as it may. Now, oh, let's go back to Matthew. You know, so that's what I mean. If you find meaningful extra material in Mark or Luke, call it my attention. Then the scribes and Pharisees came down from Jerusalem. And Mark has, they gathered together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes, some of the scribes. If you look at Galatians, who comes down from Jerusalem to argue with Peter, Barnabas, and Paul? In Galatians 2. That's where you need the Greek. But you can't depend on these crummy translations. I apologize. The some from James. Some. Watch that terminology, some. In Acts as well. 15. When we are having the triggering of the so-called Jerusalem Council. You have to know this stuff by heart in your brain to get a real grasp of this. Look, I'm not even a Christian. I know it better, I think, than most Christians. You don't have to agree with that. This is how well you have to know it. You have to know it better than everybody else. So you just pull these things out, bam, 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 bam. I'm lucky I teach it every other term or so. So it becomes like, because I write about it, it becomes a rote to me. So I think it's, then some came down from Jerusalem, or some Pharisees came down from Jerusalem. In chapter 15 of Acts, you can look at the language. Watch the word some, or certain ones, some certain ones, the same one, same language, same Greek. And taught the brothers that unless you were circumcised, you could not be saved. As if they had never heard that doctrine before. As if it's the Pharisees imposing circumcision on the brothers. And then Paul says, Barnabas and I went up to Jerusalem. We were furious and put the position that we had before the brothers and triggered what the so-called Jerusalem Council all through chapter 15. And Paul says everyone greeted them nicely and warmly. And then James, first Peter speaks and said we're not to trouble the Gentiles with these things. That's how he's portrayed. And then James is portrayed as giving the final rulings. Abstain from blood, which means you're not going to be drinking any communion ceremonies of the blood of Christ. Abstain from blood, even symbolically. You know, James is the chief, the big chief. Pauline communion is out the window. But that doesn't mean it really is out the window. I'm just saying that's the implication. Abstain from blood, fornication, certainly drinking blood. That's a Greek mystery cult procedure and activity. That you drink the blood of the living and dying God to gain his immortality. You drink Osiris, you drink Orpheus, you drink Dionysus, you drink Mithra. Mithra was full of all this blood stuff. This was important in the Greco-Roman world, to have cults of this kind. They're called mystery religions. I'm not a great expert on that. You can do a paper on that if you like. But don't think that the James people, you can't, look, I don't have time to argue with you about it. You just decide and weigh this yourself. You've heard the Orthodox, now you hear the unorthodox. We can't argue it out, we would never get anywhere. You argue it out in your own mind and put your position, but the point of the matter is, just think about that. You can't ban blood and then have a ceremony, even if it's only symbolic, on drinking blood. So the Jerusalem church banned blood, at the very least, because we don't even know if this presentation of the Jerusalem conference, as it's called, is authentic in Acts 15. But even if it isn't, it's pretty damning on some of these issues. Anyway, James rules. I rule, making it easy for Gentiles, not hard. They should abstain from blood, which they don't do, by the way. I mean, I don't even abstain from blood, so, you know, I go down to McDonald's and eat juicy hamburgers, you know, and the more blood, you know, dripping out of hamburgers on the beach and barbecue, the better, man. It all smells good, and you know, oh, that meat was, my mother used to say, oh, that meat was really juicy, you know. Well, not kosher meat isn't juicy, I'll tell you that. They drain all the blood out of it, you know. In any case, abstain from blood, and that doesn't mean just killing, it means going near women in menstrual cycles, eating blood, and all that kind of stuff. Things sacrificed to idols, which I've already emphasized. Fornication, which I mentioned a little bit, and the last thing, strangled things. And there the pseudo-Clementine recognitions helps you flesh that out. I already knew what it meant. It means carrying. Because a strangled thing, a beast of prey was seen to strangle the windpipe of its prey. And that's an attempt to translate into Greek from Hebrew, a word which was not so familiar to Greek. Pseudo-Clementines gives the whole thing in several different passages where it says, you know, abstain from, you know, food that has been killed by, you know, beasts of prey, food lying by the wayside, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. And that's just a short carrying. If you look at Ezekiel, instructions to the priests in the new temple, and after he defines who the sons of Issachar in chapter 44, he speaks of abstention from carrying. And then finally, the Quran has picked this up. This is the basis of Quranic Muslim dietary law. Jamesian directives is Quranic dietary law. Muslims are instructed to abstain from blood, things immolated to an idol, and carrying.